With over 173 million fans, college sports are more popular than the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL, and any other sports property. Ben Sutton is the founder and former chairman, and president of IMG College, the largest collegiate sports marketing and broadcast company in America. Sutton founded ISP Sports in 1992, merged with IMG in 2010, and led the firm to industry-leading positions in multiple business lines, including multimedia, ticketing, stadium seating, hospitality, and licensing. Today, he is Chairman Emeritus of IMG and also serves as a board member to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, the United States Olympic Committee Foundation, Wake Forest University, and the National Football Foundation, as well as the Naismith Basketball Foundation. Please join me in welcoming our first keynote speaker of this year's Entrepreneurship Summit, Ben Sutton.
Morning, everybody. Morning. Who wouldn't want to do that, right? I'll say this probably 3 times during the deal. Even when I watched that video, I just kind of pinched myself. Even to this day, I could have been practicing law, and instead I got to work in the college sports business. It was great. Hey, Lizzie, I have my young associate Lizzie Ward here. We built that. That's what all of you are going to be doing one day. You're going to be standing up here talking about that. I'm delighted to be here today to kind of talk a little bit about in my life as a serial entrepreneur, which is actually getting ready to start again, but unfortunately because I have 14 non-disclosure agreements in place, I can't tell you what I'm doing. But I'll tell you about my old adventure. I can't tell you about my new one yet. My journey is really one of great successes, massive disappointments, great friendships, magical culture and team building, which I see as paramount to building anything that's built to last. And then I always on whatever the opportunities are for tomorrow. I stole that last concept really from my favorite Seuss book, which now gets quoted by every speaker at every school, but we've given it to every single employee in our company for 25 years. Dr. Seuss's "Oh, the Places You Will Go," and I want you to tuck that away for a little bit later. I have a great friend by the name of Dr. Terry Don Phillips. Terry Don was, obviously you can tell he's from the South because he's got a double name. He's not from Alabama because his second name wasn't Bob. But Terry Don and I were great friends. He's athletic director at Oklahoma State. Then he went to Clemson University where he's the athletic director. He retired a couple of years ago. And we were at dinner at the nice restaurant in Clemson. You notice I said the, not multiple. So Calhoun Corners. And when we finished dinner, the waitress came over to him and said, well, Dr. Phillips, said, don't y'all want some dessert? We've got homemade dessert tonight. And he said, well, what do you have? And he said, she said, I've got homemade apple pie and homemade pecan pie. Now remember, we're in South Carolina. I can't say anything. That's how I grew up saying it too. And he said, well, I'll just have a slice of both. And I said, really? He said, yeah, because there ain't much better than a good piece of apple pie with a piece of pecan pie right on top of it. So this morning I'm aiming to put a double slice of pie on your plate. I have truly been blessed to live the American dream. What happened to me, what happened for my family, what happened for our team, could only have happened in the United States of America, the greatest country in the history of humankind. And our particular story could only happen with the help of a lot of people and a great team along the way who were really willing to invest and help us realize and unfold our dreams. I want to kind of give you a little backstory. It's late in the fall of 1966. I'm 8 years old. Don't do the math. And the only handheld device I knew at that time was a small transistor radio. How many of you are old enough to even remember transistor radios with a little bit? Thank you very much. That could pull in signals from the two little stations in Hertford County, North Carolina, where I grew up, population of about 6,000 people. It was in rural northeastern North Carolina. For the youngsters in the room, they had not invented the iPhone yet, no satellite radio, and I know that makes me seem anxious. But Thanksgiving weekend rolled around, and my parents always took us. At that point, there were 4 or 5 kids. I guess I think my mother was pregnant with the 5th. And they took us all 100 miles away up north to the nearest big city, which was Richmond, Virginia, to see the real Santa Claus at the Miller and Rhodes department store in downtown. And it was there that I conveyed my innermost wish to Santa, and that's what I wanted for Christmas was this really cool world band radio that I had spied at the Western Auto Store, one of about 5 stores in the downtown of Murfreesboro, North Carolina, where I grew up. For me, it was all about sports, and specifically about the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. You see, the Wake Forest radio broadcast was on one station in the faraway city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 5 hours away, and we couldn't get it. The 2 little radio stations in Hertford County where I grew up carried the broadcast of 2 of the proud but very equal members of the University of North Carolina system, the little college in Raleigh and the other little one in Chapel Hill. Anyway, I'd read about these new world band radios and how they could pick up signals and broadcast from faraway places. And when Christmas morning rolled around, I got my wish. And a few nights later, I could hear through a scratchy signal every moment of Demon Deacon hoops. I'd learned an early life lesson. I was passionate about and loved sports, especially college sports. I didn't yet comprehend at 8 years old that anyone could actually make money other than players playing the games and owners owning the teams. But I did know that college sports in general and college sports in particular really unlocked inner joy in me, and that some way it was supposed to be a part of my future. And I remembered that lesson many, many times over the years, the ensuing years. Likewise, part of knowing who you are supposed to be or who you're supposed to become is also knowing what you're not supposed to be. I told you I was a Wake Forest fan. We won the ACC championship in 1971, and I went to the football camp at Wake Forest that summer, and I met one of my favorite all-time people in college sports, a guy named Oval James. He coached at Wake Forest and lots of other places. He spent most of his career coaching for Pat Dye at Auburn. On the last day of camp, Coach James, who I remain friends with, in spite of the fact that he tells this story more often than I do, the last day of camp, he pulled me aside and he dashed all my dreams of becoming an all-ACC quarterback. He looked me square in the eye and said, son, I hope you're smart as hell or you got another sport you can play because football ain't going to work out for you. So that was the end of my football career. I concentrated on baseball after that. I learned lots of other lessons about being successful in life and business in that little town that I grew up in. Dad spent the first 30 years of his career as a chief financial officer of a little junior college there. My mother taught kindergarten. We had a Mayberry-like life. Our front yard looked out on a beautiful farm, and we fished in the pond behind the house, rode our bikes everywhere in town, and we never locked our doors. Can you imagine that today? Maybe in Lexington, Virginia. By the way, I got here at 1 o'clock in the morning last night, stayed at the beautiful Robert E. Lee Hotel, and the power was off. How many of you had no power last night, right? And I left my door open last night. I was like, well, it seems like the air's working in the hall, so I'll let it come in. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. Every single one of us went to college because that's what you do in our family. Our parents were the first generation of their families to go to college. And it's really quite remarkable that they were able to get all of us through given their limited financial opportunity in a little bitty place like that. But they worked hard, and they insisted that we all go to college and that it would better our lives. And of course today there's research on that that's incredible. But what it taught me was the value of hard work and really being resilient. And I would tell you my first lesson as an entrepreneur is that you really have to bust your ass if you want to get ahead, and most importantly if you want to stay ahead. Because once you reach the top like this, then everybody's gunning for you. In 1976, thanks to the benefit of people I didn't even know, I was afforded the opportunity to go to Wake Forest. Someone made it possible for me to go by giving scholarships for farm boys from Eastern North Carolina. That fueled my desire to do more with my life than just make money and to create opportunities for others. And I'll tell you, one of the really fun things since we sold our business has been to really identify causes that our family is passionate about, and to be able to invest in those causes in a way where you can truly effectuate change. A lot of my friends think I'm crazy because I've made much of that investment in the Wake Forest football program, but I'm convinced that we can win. It was at Wake Forest when I went there as a freshman that I really learned to care about learning. I can remember those first days on campus. I called my dad. I'm in a school where lots of people went to elite boarding schools and prep schools, and here's this guy that talks like this. This has never changed. And I said, Dad, this is like academic all-star camp, and I'm the misfit. But it was the first of a lot of character building experiences that I learned on that campus that really kind of shaped much of the rest of my life. In many ways, it's the place where I learned how to learn and where I became curious. And we talk a lot in our culture and our business about curiosity. There are lots, there are people that are, of high intellect, and there are other people who are just quite curious. There are some people who are both. But given a choice between a brilliant intellectual elitist and someone who loves to drink deeply from great books and be in great conversations, deep conversations, I'll take the curious person every single day. If you have both, then you're a lethal combination. One of my first classes at Wake Forest, and I knew I could speak about this at Washington Lee, I was a KA at Wake Forest, and the founder of KA is one of your namesakes, Robert E. Lee. Stayed in the Robert E. Lee Hotel last night. The history of the South, in which the esteemed professor with whom I became great friends proclaimed that the South didn't win the war, but they sure won the Reconstruction. Years later, when the great Teddy Forsman, a mythical Wall Street legend I never thought this guy from Murfreesboro, North Carolina would meet, we were negotiating for the sale of my company. No investment bankers in the room because Teddy didn't do business that way, and neither did I. We both had them, and they were outside the room. I liked mine. He didn't really care for his. And I told him that story, and he said, son, I've been being fleeced by Southerners all my life, to which I responded, let's keep that streak alive. 33 years ago, I passed on, coming out of law school, a $30,000 a year job at a law firm upon graduation from law school, and that's when $30,000 was $30,000. I mean, Ross Singletary, who's here and runs our little family office for us now, wouldn't have taken me as a client. But I turned down that $30,000 a year job to take a $15,000 a year job working in the athletic department at Wake Forest because that's what my heart told me to do. Not what my parents or my friends or my own brain may have thought what was best. But I'm reminded by what my friend and the great author John Maxwell always says. He works this into every speech he gives, and I'm sure he didn't invent it, but I heard it first from him. The two greatest days in a person's life are the day they're born and the day they figure out why. That was my day. I knew precisely that I was actually following God's calling in my life. I've been governed by a few simple rules, and one of them is this: few things in life inspire passion. You ought to pursue only those. Those early life lessons I had growing up and through my Wake Forest time were really beginning to get me to focus on the prize. So I went to Wake Forest and served my 8.5-year apprenticeship to learn a new craft. I became an entrepreneur in the process. I think I was already an entrepreneur because I remember I was telling this story a couple of days to someone. My dad gave us like a quarter each week when we were really young for an allowance, and later we got up to 50 cents. And finally, my brother Steve, who is watching down on us from heaven today, we actually had saved enough of our money. The rest of our siblings just spent all of it like they do today. And we saved all our money, and we went out and bought a lawnmower. And we started a lawnmower service at 13 years old. And I remember at 14, Dad tried to give us our 50-cent allowance one night at dinner, and we said, "We don't need your money anymore." We sold Christmas cards door to door. We sold first aid kits. We did all kinds of things to make money. But I really kind of honed my entrepreneurial skills early at Wake Forest. I got to travel and do things I'd never done before. I traveled with our radio and TV crews, and I learned the broadcasting business. I drove to the far corners of the state of North Carolina trying to find stations to carry those broadcasts. I produced my first TV and radio shows. I helped even lay out and design game day programs in newspapers. The youngsters in the room don't know what a newspaper is, but they existed back in the ancient days. I honed my listening skills. I daily dedicated time, still do, to think about new things and new ways and new ideas and to read. And I learned to sell, and this is one of my most important lessons as a young entrepreneur. I learned to always, always, always ask for the order. Unless you can do that, you will not be successful. One thing led to another, and I felt like I could replicate what we were doing at Wake Forest and have an even more profound impact, not only at my alma mater, but on the business of college sports by running my own shop. I envisioned doing something that would help lift college sports financially and on the nation's stage to put it at its rightful place, which was either right beside or even beyond the NFL. Our research says that in many ways college sports ought to be more valuable than the NFL, but they have been together with a federal antitrust exemption. I won't say what my lawyer always tells me not to say, for over 100 years. So, but I've always felt that college sports was really the most popular and most viable, sustainable sports entity in the country. So with just one client, my alma mater in tow, my team and I truly invented an entire industry. Our two primary competitors at the time, both respectfully friends of mine, Learfield and Host Communications, had 20 and 25-year head starts on us respectively, had multiple schools that they were working with when we opened our shop in 1992, but both were laser focused on being sports radio businesses. And they left what at that time was less valuable inventory to be marketed and managed by other vendors and, in my view, competitors. So we were innovators, or we were fools, that depended on who you ask. And we honestly believe there was a better way for our partner schools and prospective sponsors and our fans if you bundled rights together, and if we took intellectual property and experiential opportunity and radio play-by-play and coaches call-in shows and coaches TV shows and live play-by-play of college football and basketball games on TV, hospitality. If we took all of those rights, eventually we had digital. Al Gore had not invented the internet quite yet. And that if you bundled all those rights together, you could take those to market and you could better price and better afford greater opportunity for our school clients. Well, within 10 years, the entire industry adopted our model, and the competition became more substantial and more fierce. We put a bullseye on our friends at ESPN and the NFL because really they were our biggest competitors. But tall odds were against our team for over 2 decades. I am reminded often of a story about the now deposed Roger Ailes, and I guess it's not in vogue to talk about him given recent news, but I'm reminded of when people thought he was crazy to start Fox News on behalf of Rupert Murdoch's company at Fox. And they said, well, how are you going to compete with CNN? And every day he used to fuel his troops coming in the morning and say, how do we beat the hell out of CNN today? Basically, that's the same thing we did at ISP and then IMG. Today, Fox completely obliterates, dominates CNN. Our team and I would go to bed every night kind of dreaming about what we could do the next day and waking up the next morning thinking about what we could do to go out and beat the National Football League. And we were fueled by the notion that our work had true meaning and value because the money that we generated, which last year was over $500 million that went back to our client institutions, was used to pay for college scholarships. We talked a few moments ago about the value of college education. Over 50% of college football players and 80% of college basketball players at the highest level of Division I are first-generation college students. So our view was kids play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back of the jersey. So we owned the values proposition compared to the National Football League, where they're just basically the players are just commodities. By 2014, I'd had the great privilege of leading a team of over 1,100 people, men and women, who made up the largest college sports marketing and broadcast company in America, actually the largest sales team in America, a nearly $1 billion business that produces over 50,000 hours of radio programming a year on the largest sports or largest radio network of any variety in the United States, one of the largest television networks. They're the largest producer of game day publications and digital publications in the country, and we were working with the best brands in the business. In 2010, never really intending to sell our business, we did. In fact, I had spent a year and a half in the worst economy since the Great Recession, raising the money to go buy my biggest competitor at that point in the college space, Learfield Communications. That deal fell through, so I took a meeting with Teddy Forsman. We hit it off immediately. And in 2010, he bought our company for $150 million, and we rolled a considerable amount of currency also into the new company of IMG Worldwide. 4 years later, Silver Lake Capital Partners and WME bought our company for $2.4 billion. And I only talk about the money part. It's really not that important to me, except for the part we can give away and fund our new enterprise, but it's just a good way to keep score, or a way. I have to tell you that never in my wildest dreams did I ever think this would happen to me or for our team. More importantly, the college sports business had really saved the IMG brand. IMG had kind of grown up in the first 50 years being essentially an agency for athletes. But I would remember having dinner with some folks from the NBA about 4 or 5 years ago and talking about the number of agents in the NBA had gone from like 40 to like 4,000. And you can do the math. There are like 11 or 12 or 13 players on each team and maybe 26 or 29 teams in the NBA. Who do they all represent? So that business had really become commoditized, and really college sports became the hallmark of the North American business for IMG, and gave that brand real oomph in the marketplace as we took that to market. And really, one of the things we talked about a lot at IMG College and at ISP before that was trying to closely follow the treatise that Jerry Porras and Jim Collins had written about building companies to last. The company built to last is kind of one of the Bibles at ISP and IMG, and every new employee in our company is asked to read it because I'll talk in code and they won't know what I'm talking about if they hadn't read it. When we closed that last deal, that little $700,000 business we started with one multimedia partner was now not one company, but as Daniel said, an aggregation of 4 national market-leading companies that varied in size from $30 million a year in revenue to almost $500 million. They were in multimedia, which are the rights that I talked about earlier, radio, television, digital, etc. Licensing, which is the management of intellectual property. We had a ticketing company and a stadium seating business. Each of those businesses were started from scratch. I mean, these were not businesses that we went out and said, okay, we're going to buy this company and bring them in. Each of those businesses was a business that we started from scratch. Now we had a company that employed over 1,100 people, had 450 university partnerships, and as I said earlier, to this very moment, I still kind of pinch myself that this could happen to us. I want to share a few other things with you that I think made us successful as we were kind of building those businesses and building a culture and a company that we wanted to last. It's a great old saying, the way to succeed in anything is to do everything. Most of you that are alums have heard, well, I'm sure all of you who are alums have heard of the guy I'm considered the greatest coach in the history of modern American sport. I don't mean in just college basketball or at any level. I mean, he was the greatest coach in the history of modern American sport, John Wooden. Coach K, Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Dean Smith, they're all great coaches, but none have anywhere near the record of success as Coach Wooden. He won 11 national championships in college basketball, and he won them in an era, it's hard to imagine now, when it was actually hard to get in the tournament because only 16 teams were in the tournament all those years he was a coach. And the way you got in is you had to win your conference. If you didn't win your conference, you didn't get in the NCAA. He also graduated his players, and he tended to that flock for the rest of his life, and he lived to be 99 years old. I was fortunate to get to know Coach Wooden in the last 10 years of his life. He was a remarkable man. He was simply brilliant, curious, sharp as a tack until the very end. He loved to talk about life and love and liberty, and he would really only talk about basketball if I brought it up. He was fanatical about forming good habits. His favorite lesson was little things make big things happen. They say when he coached that his practices were just wildly intense. He believed that that's when habits were developed and honed, and that the games were actually almost anticlimactic and just an opportunity to see the lessons from practice work in a lab, essentially. The next lesson I would tell you is to give back. Our parents, who were never wealthy, taught us by example about tithing and giving back. They always believed that to whom much is given, much is expected. They never had much, but they still gave lots of what they had away. I hope we've imparted those same lessons to our children. They seem to be buying into the idea of us giving their inheritance away. We'll see. Next lesson, be in the moment. When my children, Addison and Trey, were deep into their Taekwondo experience, one of the things I loved about it was the absolute relentless focus on being focused. They would talk about eye focus, mind focus, body focus. When you're with a friend, when you're with a colleague, when you're with a potential investor, a customer in class or at work, be in the moment. Here's an example. Put your hand held down every time you go on a date, you're in a class, talking to a friend or in person, having dinner with your family. First, because it's just rude not to. Second, because humans matter more than machines. And as I remind my children, remember early in the Bible, God gave humans dominion over the beast, birds, and iPhones. We built the machines for convenience, not to take the place of our family and friends. Follow your dream. Dare to be different. Never be compliant. One of you should decide now that you'll run for president one day. If you'll cut my taxes, keep us safe, understand that excellence in education, devotion to capitalism, which is moral, by the way, and job creation is the foundation of a great and sustainable democracy, I'll start raising money for you today. Your dream is proprietary. It belongs to you. Follow your heart, pursue your passion. That's what ministers mean when they say God has called you to do something. Pin your ears back and be entrepreneurs. You've got to take chances. High risk equals high reward. There's a reason old folks say these things. I guess I'm one of those folks now. Take chances on real change. With low risk, there's low reward in a life of just going through the motions. It works in school, in your relationships, in your profession. Who wouldn't want to increase their odds of success if all it takes is trying more and different things? I tell my children all the time, I've been so fortunate to understand, and I've traveled this country, I've been to every state in America except for Alaska, I guess, and we never chased any business up there. But one of the things that I'm struck by is that when I travel the country, I believe that probably 50% of the people that are in the working population of America have a job that's a means to an end. It's a way to pay the bills every month. I think about 40 to 45% have what they would call a career. It's something they believe in, they see advancement in it, they see opportunity, and they enjoy and appreciate the career path they're on. Somewhere between 5 and 10% of the people that I've met in my life's experience breathe rare air, though. Those people every single day go to something about which they're greatly passionate. I mentioned Jim Host earlier. He used to say, and I stole this earlier in my talk, You know, I almost hate going to sleep at night because I just wake up in the morning so energized by what I get to go do every single day. That's the life I've enjoyed for the last 30 years. And frankly, that's the life of most entrepreneurs that I know. So when I talk about that 5 or 10% that breathe rare air, virtually none of them work in big companies. They work in businesses that they own, where they're as my favorite philosopher Cosmo Kramer said, they're the masters of their own domain. Take nothing for granted. Anderson Cooper grew up quite wealthy and privileged, says the most important thing I've learned in this job is that something I never understood before, and that's this. The line that separates each of us from one another, the line that separates rich and poor, the healthy from the sick, the living from the dead, that line is just thread thin. Now, I mentioned my brother Steve a while ago, being up in heaven. About 13 years ago, 15 years ago, he got cancer. He got leukemia. He had 2 little girls who were 10 and 13 years old, and I'll never forget going to Emory Hospital with him. He was in Minnesota, collapsed. I chartered a plane, sent it up there to pick him up, brought him down to Emory so he could see the docs there. And the next day, we went into the office. They did a bunch of blood tests, and they came back in and they said, you've got CML, chronic myelogenous leukemia, I believe it's called. And you best get your affairs in order. And so and he said, well, how long do I have to live? And they said, probably 4 to 6 months. There are certainly things we can do, you know, to give you good quality of life for 3 or 4 months, but then it's going to be kind of a downhill slide and we can manage pain. And that wasn't good enough for my brother, and they didn't know my brother, and he was a fighter. And he looked at me and he said, you know, the most important years raising my children were my daughter Kate, who's the oldest, was the years from 10 to 13. That's when I mattered the most in her life, as she became a budding teenager and became a teenager. I got to figure out a way to give that same gift to my daughter Allison. Well, he fought like hell for 32 months, and literally weeks after his youngest daughter's 13th birthday, he died. And I remember him saying to me, at the beginning of that journey, I'll live every single day with a greater sense of purpose. I'm not going to get trapped in stupid stuff. I'm going to live with great urgency. His last words to me before he slipped into a coma were, mission accomplished. I remember that really in everything I do. And I don't wish for any of you to ever have to go through an experience like that to kind of remember what matters most in life. But I also remember he and I on many, many occasions as he was being treated in Seattle and Houston and Atlanta, trying to kind of prolong his viability and vitality. That we talked a lot about the lesson that mattered most that our parents had taught us, that really became the governing mantra of the business that we built at ISP and IMG, and that was to do the right thing the right way at the right time. So if you don't remember anything else I say today, remember that. And even when people aren't looking. While I wrap up, I want to encourage all of you to kind of think about one person you love or a person who's really impacted your life. Your mom or your dad, a family member, a friend, a professor, an investor who believed in you and supported you in your journey. And write down one thing that you think about with them, and then thank them. And put that on a card and send it to them, and on a piece of paper that's written in your own hand, and watch them light up. Even Jimmy Fallon takes 10 minutes every week to write thank you notes. Here's the deal. Text messages and emails don't count when it comes to the expression of sincere gratitude. Don't count at all. If you want to show someone that you really care, write them a note in your own handwriting, even if it's bad, because it's a true and tangible demonstration that you care, that you say what you mean, and you mean what you say. When we were growing up, my mother instilled in us, and Reed demanded from us, that her 5 children do the same thing every week. I've insisted that my team do it for the last 25 years. Now people write books and articles in national publication about our company's commitment to this small but very important habit. But here's the effect. We didn't lose customers. You're all in a place now where you're the most important, especially the students, I guess this is really for them, you're the most important inflection point, or one of the most important inflection points in your life's journey. When you leave here, I dare you to do your part to change the world. You hear a lot of people talk, and I hope one day you'll read the book Good to Great. For those of you who are not familiar with Good to Great, I'm going to give you one premise from it. Good is the absolute enemy of great. If we want to continue to build our country, the greatest country in the history of humankind, to continue to be the greatest country in the history of humankind, my view is that entrepreneurs will be the people who will lead the way. We've got to be fanatical in the pursuit of greatness every single day in the creation of jobs, because it's part of our moral capitalistic society. And we live in a society today that's often dominated by collectivism, compliance, over-programming, and a large dose of immediate gratification and meism. So that challenge is great. But right here in front of me, amongst these young students that are here today, are the next generation of leaders. My parting words to all of you in this room: use your head, but follow your heart. Dream big dreams, dare to be great, dare to make a difference, live big, full lives. You only get one. But always take care of the little things and the little people. And if you do all that, then OMG, the places you will go. Any more questions? Do we have time for questions, or if anybody?
We have about 5 minutes for questions.
Does anybody have a question?
Open it up to the audience.
No questions in the whole room. Yes, sir. I'm sorry?
Who was your first school after Wake Forest?
Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech. We built our, I tell you, Ross, we built our company. I love the way BB&T grew their business. I still think they're one of the best run businesses in America, certainly amongst the banks. And we really grew, we looked at their philosophy, and they really grew to build scale and build efficiency. They built a contiguous geography, and that's what we did. So we went up and down the East Coast, then across the Southeast and Southwest, and then we went along the West Coast. And I used to tell people we didn't have many properties in the middle of the country. And you know, our map kind of looked early like the University of Miami logo. It was like a big U. But you know, Learfield had all those schools in the middle of the country, and they all look good like on a Republican presidential electoral map, but nobody actually lives there. So, by the way, I'm going to send a copy of this to Hillary and Donald. I got plenty of it for both of them. So don't even get me started. Yes, sir.
It sounded like you had a magnificent culture. How intentional were your intentions in
that is a great question, and the word you use is the word we used all the time. You have to be intentional to build what we called a meaningful, purposeful culture, where people really celebrated each other, and where you built longevity in your workforce. You built loyalty in your workforce, and if you do that, then you can build sustainability. What we found, you know, it was easy. I mean, the guys that bought our company last year, you know, 300 of their 400 people in their company were all in one office in Los Angeles. And as I cautioned their leaders, I said, you know, you've got basically 3 offices, one in Nashville, one in New York, and this big one in LA. Culture is easy when you've only got 1 or 2 or 3 offices. When you go into a geographically dispersed environment, when I gave the keys over to the company, there were 105 offices in the college enterprise. And so you really have to work at it. And it means people have to travel. You have to create environments where people collaborate. None of that happens on Skype. None of it can happen you know, on email. None of it can happen on conference calls. It's got to happen in a true, and going back to your word, intentional. It meant that I traveled, as an example, 150 or 200 days a year. And we created a structure where we had senior people on campuses every 2 or 3 weeks with the teams, intentionally trying to build and sustain that culture, which was really very people focused. And you know, I mean, I had competitors, frankly, that they were chasing their tail all the time because they were losing 30 and 40% of their workforce every year. You can't build a company if you're a dynamic growth business like ours was. You really cannot. You can't keep up with the growth opportunity if you're always kind of trying to backfill with the stuff that you've got. I don't see it as any different. When I talk to our sales guys, you know, it's easier to keep an old customer than it is to get a new customer. And I think the same thing about my teammates. And certainly you're going to have some attrition, and frankly, I think Jack Welch had it right. You want to have enough to keep things fresh and keep new blood in the system. But 20 and 30 and 40%, which is kind of an industry standard, that was unacceptable to us. We couldn't grow, we couldn't keep up if we had. So, and I miss that, to be honest with you. That's the part of the business I miss the most. So you just asked a great question for me. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask, what do you think is the main thing that people who get business education are missing when they join the workforce and entrepreneurship?
What do I think they're missing? I don't think there's enough focus on teamwork. I think there's way too much focus. I talked about it at the end of my talk. I think there's way too much focus. I mean, we live in a very entitled society right now, and everybody's kind of all about me. And you see, even great companies like Nike, their slogan is "Just do it." I mean, it just sounds selfish to me. And I mean, I think they're a great company, and they're actually parts of my company that I modeled off of Phil Knight's financial model. But I really think, being able to develop, kind of going back to your question, esprit de corps means having a bunch of people who understand that the individual parts are not nearly as important as the concoction of the whole recipe. We had great success hiring former student athletes in our business. Because student athletes often come in with better organizational skills, they understand esprit de corps, they understand the value of teamwork and hard work, and frankly, they're really on a learning curve. They're kind of way ahead of everybody else that comes out of college because of that experience. And so we had a real focus in our company on finding those folks because they're really good at also imparting that wisdom and knowledge to other 22 and 23-year-olds that are just coming out of school. Yes, sir. Mr. Singletary, taller.
How often do you find yourself, kind of when you're trying to grow IMG College and the entire business that it's become, how often do you find yourself kind of combating what people were kind of bogging you down with, kind of doubting, versus how confident you kind of following your heart and your head with what you knew was best for the business and best for the country? Like, how would you kind of describe that?
So I would tell you that it's different working, and there's some private equity guys in here, and thanks to your dad who runs our little family office, we're invested in private equity, but the reality is that when it was mine, it was easier. And when you're working for somebody else that you have to kind of give answers to on a month-by-month or quarter-by-quarter basis, this is a little bit different. And so it's a little more challenging to stay as true to your mission and to have a really long view of your business. Now, having said that, I'm poisoned by the fact that the company that I sold to, Forsman Little, the principal, who I became great friends with, Teddy Forsman, died a year into our experience. I think he would have worked for another 7 to 10 years, and we would have had a lot of investment in our business. The guys that we sold to the next time, if all the trades are right, are thinking about a public offering sometime in the next 2 or 3 years. So there are going to be limits to how much people invest on the horizon of a private equity investment versus the outset. So I've probably been on the end part twice, and that makes it a little bit more difficult.
One more question.
All right, there we go. Yes, sir.
You talked about earlier the value of hard work, that you also mentioned another term, resilience. And so obviously you're able to see the hard work that you put in. But could you give an example of maybe a time where you had to bounce back after an unfortunate experience where you really had to demonstrate your company's resilience?
Yeah, I could give you about 100. I always tell my kids, the 10 most important lessons I learned running the business were the mistakes I made. And to that end, I would say, the most important thing, this smart guy learns from his mistake, doesn't repeat the same mistake. Had to learn that lesson the hard way too. But I mean, certainly, going in and making a deal with the school is an example. I mean, the deals that we made in our media business were to go in and say, well, we're going to pay the school X number of millions of dollars a year. We're going to harvest all these rights. We're going to give you this rights fee, and then the way we made our money was basically selling into those rights that we bought, and hopefully generating more than we had paid out. I mean, I could give you, fortunately not a lot, but certainly a half dozen examples of places where we miscalculated, or we believed, we heard what we wanted to believe. And we believed in an upside, or we believed in a coach who we thought was going to turn a program around, and we were like, okay, we'll make this bet. So those would be the most tangible lessons, because we made deals where we'd lose. We made deals where we'd make $1 million or $2 million a year. We made other deals where we're going to lose $2 or $3 million a year. As I said, fortunately we had 435 that were pretty good, but we had 15 that were kind of an anchor on us. So. Is that it?
Thank you.
All right, sure. I'm glad to stay for a few minutes. So.